Embracing the other. Since God called women specifically to be a helper suited for her husband, it would be strange if he did not endow both men and women with distinguishable abilities to better fulfill their distinguishable calls. The most obvious are physical characteristics that enable women to bear and nurture children, but more subtle emotional and psychological endowments would be natural accompaniments to those physical differences, albeit on a spectrum. This is where, surprisingly, some feminist theory echoes biblical teaching about gender difference. Men and women are not interchangeable unisex beings, but they have different strengths that result in men and women solving problems, building consensus, and performing leadership functions in distinct ways. In one interesting case study, in the op-ed pages of the New York Times, When Women Make Music, a female conductor and music director outlined how gender differences in each of these three areas meant that she directed her orchestra differently than a man would. She said at one point that women's style of management is perhaps better than men's, and another, she said, insisted that musicians who are treated the way a woman conductor treats them perform better over the long run. Not surprisingly, some believe the author was guilty of a kind of reverse sexism. However, the main point, that men and women approach the same task in significantly distinct ways, has been verified by a great wave of immersional studies in the last 20 years that support the depth of gender differences in the way we think, feel, behave, work, and conduct relationships. One of the first feminist studies that argued for such irreducible gender differences was Carol Gilligan's. In a different voice in 1982, Harvard University Press, the book publisher describes it as the little book that started a revolution. Before then, social scientific theorizing emphasized the superficiality of gender differences, but Gilligan insisted that female psychological development, motivation, and even moral reasoning were different from those of males. Gilligan argued that while men seek maturity by detaching themselves, women see themselves maturing as they attach. What does that mean? Attached to what? Using all the qualifiers in the world in general as a whole and across the spectrum, men have a gift of independence, ascending gifts. They look outward, they initiate. Under sin, these traits can become either an alpha male individualism, if this capacity is turned into an idol, or dependence, if the calling is utterly rejected, and the opposite embraced in rebellion. The first sin is hypermasculinity, while the second sin is rejection of masculinity. Using all the qualifiers in the world, on the whole and across the spectrum, women have a gift of interdependence, a receiving gift. They are inwardly perceptive. They nurture. Under sin, these traits can become either a clinging dependence, if attachment is turned into an idol, or individualism, if the calling is utterly rejected, and the opposite embraced in rebellion. The first sin is hyperfemininity, while the second sin is rejection of femininity. The dance of the Trinity would lead us to expect differences such as these, as well as others, if we are made in the image of the triune dancing God. Sadly, those who most deny innate differences between men and women, fewer now before medical and scientific research join sociological and psychological studies, may end up devaluing women at the very point where they are trying to protect them. Dominant, swaggering, and sinful behavior is assumed to be the default mode if one wishes to get ahead or be taken seriously in the world. Women are asked to shed their feminine qualities and become fox men in order to be one of the boys. The strength of gender-distinct leadership, creativity, and insight that women bring to the world, to name only a few, are lost in the business world, romantic relationships, and even ministry within the church. Over the last 30 years, many philosophers and social theorists have reflected on the problem of otherness. It is natural to define one's identity against others who are different. Many have argued that this process automatically leads people to strengthen their sense of worth and uniqueness by excluding and subordinating those who are other, who are not like us. Christians can acknowledge that our sinful drive for self-justification often leads us to despise those who think, feel, and behave differently than we do. Personal, racial, and class pride naturally grow out of the human heart's alienation from God, and therefore our need to prove ourselves and win an identity based on our specialness, superiority, and performance. One of the main places exclusion of the other happens is between the sexes. Loving someone of the other sex is hard. Misunderstandings, angry explosions, and tears abound. Men tend to look down on women as they gather around the water cooler and snicker about female foibles. Foibles? Women return the favor, skewering male pretensions and weaknesses. Does anyone not know how to say men or women with that particular sneering tone? And indeed, the gap between the sexes often look like chasm. We cannot understand each other, and since the default mode of human heart is self-justification, where we cannot understand the other sex, we assume inferiority. Yet, as men and women lose or deny their peculiar honors, knowledge of how to relate to and relish the other is also lost. However, this is where Christian understanding of marriage comes in. Marriage, in the biblical view, addresses the chasm between the sexes. Marriage is a full embrace of the other sex. We accept yet struggle with the gendered otherness of our spouse, and in the process we grow and flourish in ways otherwise impossible. Because, as Genesis says, male and female are like opposite each other, both radically different and yet incomplete without each other. I have had homosexual friends, both men and women, tell me that one of the factors that made homosexual love attraction to them was how much easier it was than dealing with someone of a different sex. I have no doubt this is true. A person of one's own sex is not as likely to have as much otherness to embrace, but God's plan for married couples involves embracing the otherness to make us unified, and that can only happen between a man and a woman. Even at the atomic level, all the universe is held together by the attraction of positive and negative forces. The embrace of the other, as it turns out, really is what makes the world go round. The cross and the other.